Hi. In this video, I wanted to share the classical game that I played against Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky from quite a few years ago. Now, obviously, the news of Dania's passing has been quite hard to deal with, and I feel really strange just kind of continuing on as if nothing happened. So what I wanted to do is just kind of play my small part in trying to honor his legacy by sharing some thoughts and some games of his that I think everyone should see. Now let me start off by saying I actually didn't really know Dania super well. We weren't really all that close, but I had met him a number of times. We hung out a few times, and I always had a tremendous respect for him. I always felt like I kind of knew him from his work, from his articles on chess.com back in the day, which were absolutely fantastic, to then his books and his commentary and his streams and so on. So Dania and I are both from California. I'm a few years older than him. And the first time I remember hearing about him was because we actually shared a coach, Coach Armen, who is international master Armen Armbardsumian, originally from Armenia. And I remember when I was working with Coach Armen, I was around 16, 17 years old at the time. I think Dania was maybe around 12 to 13. I remember Armen would just rave about Dania and just how talented he was, how gifted he was, how he was going to become this incredibly strong player. And he would show me some of Dania's games, sometimes test me with positions where I would have to try and find what Dania played or how he approached the situation. And I was always just tremendously impressed with his play and his talent. He was always one of the top juniors growing up in the United States. I remember his name being very, very high up on the rankings for the top juniors under 21 as a 12, 13, 14-year-old. And of course, he went on to become, I believe, one of the best chess educators in the world. For me, he was easily one of my favorite commentators to watch, because he was just such a strong player, but he had this very unique ability to explain concepts in a very understandable way. And I know for many, many people out there, he was just their absolute favorite instructor, favorite chess teacher. And I think that's absolutely deserved. He wrote a number of books. I actually have both of them. Mastering Positional Chess was his first one, which he wrote when he was 14 years old, which at the time actually it was just like unprecedented. I remember just being so shocked by it, because it's quite a good book. Daniel found a number of great examples, and as a player, he really knew his chess history. He knew a bunch of the greats, he knew all the classics, and he used a number of great examples in the book. His second book was Mastering Complex Endgames, which also fantastic book with a number of very, very instructive examples. And two books I would definitely recommend to intermediate players looking to improve their strategic knowledge. And so, yeah, the fact that he wrote these books when he was so young, I mean, already just on its own was remarkable. But so it truly wasn't surprising that he went on to become just an absolutely brilliant creator. In every sense of the word. And I'm quite grateful that at least, in addition to all the amazing chess games that Dania played, all of his amazing blitz games, and over the board games, that we also just have tons and tons of footage of Dania. And although I didn't see a ton of his YouTube channel, I remember watching a few videos here and there. I'm definitely going to go back and just start watching probably a bunch of his content, because it was always great. And now I feel like, it's basically just a treasure trove of amazing material. So, yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think this is just a huge, huge loss for the community. I think there's no way around it, really. Yeah, it's a real shame that we won't get to see more of Dania's streams and videos and commentary in games and so on. But I do think he left an incredible legacy behind in terms of his body of work, his games, his articles, his books, his streams, his videos, just the amount of people that he taught chess to. I think I think that will carry on for a long time. So I wanted to share a couple of games of Danya's that really left an impression on me, and that I think everyone should see that's a fan of his play, including the game that I played against him in Classical. But first I wanted to start with this game that's from a few years earlier. This game was played in the 2011 US Junior Championship, where I think at the time Danya was around 16, 17 years old, rated 2472. I believe he was still international master. And his opponent in this game was a young Caden Troff, who of course went on to become a grandmaster himself. At the time, I believe Caden was roughly around 13 years old or so himself, and only rated 2255. So a very, very talented junior in his own right, but not yet quite reaching his grandmaster potential. And I remember being very, very impressed by this game. I was watching it live, or perhaps following the online broadcast. And I'd never played Danya over the board. I'd just seen a number of his games, but I had played Caden a couple of times, and Caden was always a very, very difficult opponent for me. So d4, g6, and of course, I should say Caden and Daniel, I'm sure, went on to be good friends living in Charlotte together. So g6, Danya was very well known to be a King's Indian expert. He loved this opening. In fact, he played it with both colors. He played it with black and with white. I didn't really know why he played g6 in this position. Normally, King's Indian players would start with knight f6, Danya included, but for whatever reason, he decided to start with g6 here, maybe provoking Caden to try and play e4, since Caden was definitely a big-time d4 player. But nevertheless, after c4, bishop g7, knight c3, d6, e4. Black does eventually play knight f6 here, and we transpose into a proper King's Indian. And this was definitely an opening that I think suited Danya very well, because he was just such a tactically gifted player. Very, very dynamic, very creative. I would say almost Tal-esque. And it's actually kind of serendipitous that Danya and the great Mikhail Tal share a birthday, which I only found out recently, but I found quite an interesting tidbit. So here Caden played the move f4, going for the 4-pawn attack. And Danya goes for the move bishop to g4 here, which is not the main continuation for black. Generally, black is either castling right away or playing c5 in either order. But this bishop g4 move was kind of a tricky choice that Danya comes up with. And possibly this was prepared, maybe some over-the-board inspiration, I'm not sure. But one of the ideas for black is that if white were to play knight f3, for example, then black will actually immediately take on f3, and let's say white takes with the queen, then black will come out to play knight c6, hit the d4 square, and look to play a quick e5. So for example, bishop e3, e5, black is trying to win the d4 square for the knight, and try to get into this square. So for example, fe, de, if d5, knight to d4, generally this is kind of the dark square play black is going for. If bishop takes d4, giving up the dark square bishop, generally a big problem for white in these positions is after e takes d4, black's bishop on g7 opens up along the whole diagonal, and black is generally doing really, really well in this kind of position, as white is just having tons and tons of weakened dark squares in their camp. So this is kind of one of the ideas for black. I think perhaps the best move here is bishop to e2, trading bishop for bishop, where after takes, knight takes e2. Maybe white can fight for a small advantage here. White definitely has a lot of space. But Caden was pretty aggressive in this game and decides to play the move queen to b3. And from my memory, to the best of that I can recall, I think Danya was already spending some time here. But perhaps he knew the response to this move already, because queen b3 is kind of a dubious move. And here Danya plays knight c6, which is a really, really strong reaction. Just hitting the pawn on d4 and leaving the b7 pawn completely unprotected. Now queen b3 I think was a pretty logical move, because black plays bishop g4 early on in the opening, leaving b7 undefended. So white goes queen to b3 to put pressure on this pawn. But black says go ahead and take it with knight c6, and now if queen takes b7, knight takes d4, this would be very problematic for white because knight c2 check is a huge threat, winning the rook, and the queen is kind of in no man's land on b7. And if white plays d5 here, then knight to d4, and the queen doesn't really have a comfortable way of keeping the c2 square under control. White has to go queen a4 check. Now black can go c6. The knight on d4 is quite strong. White doesn't have a great way to target it. Next, black can also consider knight d7, knight c5, going after the queen and supporting the knight on d4. And black would just have a very, very active position here. So knight c6, Kayden goes bishop e3, which I think is the most logical move, defending the pawn on d4 without allowing knight to d4 and keeping the attack on b7. And now comes e5, another very powerful move. Now this move is thematic, of course, for this position. Black is once again fighting for the d4 square, but Dania's idea is that queen takes b7, just played in the game, is now going to be met with e takes d4, which is a very, very juicy tactical move. Now he could have also played knight takes d4. I think this would have been good for black as well. If bishop takes d4, e takes d4, once again the dark squares are opening up, the knight on c3 is going to have to move, and black is just going to castle quickly here, put the rook on e8, and start going after white's king in the center, which is starting to look extremely vulnerable as white just has no development on the king side. So this was already good enough, but I really like the way Dania plays it. He goes e takes d4, which is quite tricky because, of course, he's leaving the knight on c6 hanging with check. But his point is that queen takes c6 is going to be met with bishop d7 with tempo. White has to save the queen, and next black is going to be regaining the piece, and white's position is going to be pretty much shattered. So queen a6, for example, black can take the dark squared bishop, or black could take the knight with the e4 pawn now hanging, opening up the extremely powerful King's Indian bishop on g7, getting ready to castle, bring a rook to e8, and just like that, black is just completely crushing here. So very nice idea, e takes d4, and basically white is just already losing after 8 moves in the opening in d4, which I definitely don't see every day. And I remember just being like very, very shocked by the development of this game and just how quickly it had gone south for white. Kayden, of course, keeps fighting back. He tries knight to b5, which I thought actually is a pretty clever choice, because now if black takes the bishop on e3, white will take on c6 with check. And if black were to go bishop to d7 here, well, then white has a very nice trick. Queen takes a8. After queen takes a8, knight takes c7 check. White wins back the queen. For instance, king e7, knight takes a8. And after rook takes knight, black is down the exchange here. There's some compensation, but white is actually a little bit better after bishop to d3, defending the e-pawn, and black doesn't have quite enough in this endgame. So very, very nice trick set by Kayden, but Dania, of course, spots this, and instead of taking the bishop on e3, he just castles. Now, I should say he could have taken on e3 and then met queen takes c6 check with king f8. Black is doing extremely well here because the queens are left on the board. The e3 pawn is actually going to be just a complete thorn in white's position. And yeah, in the long run, black's unopposed dark square bishop is just such a powerful piece here. But what Dania does is a lot more practical because he just castles. So he just gets his king out of danger first. His rook now can come to the e-file, and it's the same thing. If white takes the knight on c6, well, then he's taking the bishop on e3, with the difference being that he doesn't have to put his king on f8. Instead, his king is much better on g8. So now white took on c6. There's not really a ton else we can suggest. If knight takes d4, for example, black could trade on d4, bishop takes d4, and now black just has a number of strong moves in this position. Rook e8 is good, rook b8 is good, c5 to follow up. So for example, black could start with rook to b8, play c5 as well. Let's say bishop c3, then knight takes e4. And again, white's king is just completely stuck in the center. There's queen h4 check in the air, rook to 8 as well. And yeah, white's king is not going to survive here very long. So basically, white is just way too far behind in development. He tried queen takes c6, but now d takes e3. Black takes the dark squared bishop. And now, of course, the dark squares are a huge problem for white. He goes back, knight c3, defending the e-pawn, but rook to b8. And at this point, black's position almost plays itself because he has this unopposed dark square bishop, which is just such a strong piece. And of course, the rook now on the b file is super powerful as well. Now, instead of knight c3, white could have, let's say, taken on c7, or like queen takes c7. But basically, any move here is fine for black. Black can try to avoid the endgame, or black can just go for the endgame and play something like rook b8 or rook c8, and all of white's pawns in the position are hanging. So this would, yeah, just be a completely lost endgame for white. Knight h5 somewhere, and white just has way too many weaknesses, especially on the diagonal, to survive this one. So knight c3, rook b8, white tries his chances here. Bishop to e2, and now just rook takes b2, simple chess. Here, of course, white could take on g4, but then knight takes g4, and black is doing great here. Knight is threatening to come into f2. The knight on c3 is hanging as well. G2 is hit, so yeah, everything here is dropping for white. Instead, Kayden decided to castle queenside, which, yeah, might as well be bold, you know. At this point, if you're just in huge trouble, like you gotta try something. Obviously, white's king doesn't have great chances here on c1, but white was pretty much losing either way, so might as well try and get your pieces out and hope your opponent makes a mistake. But Daniel, of course, fantastic attacker. He doesn't let this one slip. He goes queen to b8, now just defending the rook on b2. White played h3, hitting the bishop, and now black has lots of good moves here. He could take on e2, queen to b4 is quite a strong idea, just hitting the knight. But Daniel finds a really nice shot here to kind of end things. Knight takes e4. In the game, knight takes e4 was played. It's hard to suggest other moves. If queen takes e4, of course, black can just take on c3, and white is soon getting mated. The threat, for instance, is rook takes a2, followed by queen b2 mate, which is very, very difficult to deal with. Otherwise, knight on c3 is hanging, and so yeah, it's basically over. So Kayden took on e4, but now comes the final attack. Rook b1 check, queen b2, king to d3, and Daniel here finds a forced mate with queen a3. Now white has to drop back knight c3. If king goes to c2, then of course rook to b2 check ends things. Let's say king c1, rook takes a2, and queen b2 mate. So knight c3, white gives a piece. The king starts walking up. f5 check, king d5, rook takes d1, bishop takes d1, queen d4 check. And I think after rook takes d1, actually white just resigned here because mate is imminent. So for example, bishop takes d1, queen d4, king e6. The fastest mate here is queen f6 check. If the king goes back to d5, then queen f7 is mate, which is kind of nice. The king is just caught in the center of the board, all of black's pawns doing work. And if king d7, there's a few ways to mate here as well, but queen f7 is actually mated one here as well. So in view of this, white resigned. So very, very nice game, 20 moves, you know, miniature. And of course, black really made it look easy. It seemed like white was just kind of busted out of the opening, and indeed he was. But yeah, strong players often make very good games look like they were effortless. Whereas anyone that's played a chess game knows how hard it is to beat a strong opponent with black, you know, so quickly. But yeah, I remember this game made such an impression on me. This was back in 2011, so I was probably 2200 or so myself at the time. And yeah, I remember just thinking like, wow, such nice dynamics, that nice tactics, and yeah, incredible game, you know, at the junior level. Daniel wasn't even a grandmaster yet, but it was obvious that he was going to become one very soon. So next I wanted to share the game that I played against Daniel Naroditsky in an official classical tournament. This game actually took place here in St. Louis at the 2014 Spice Cup, which took place in October. So actually this game was almost 11 years ago exactly that we played. This was an open tournament. I forget the exact time control, but it was something like 90 plus 30. So 90 minutes for 40 moves, 30 minutes added after move 40, 30-second increment. And this was my first time, I think, facing Daniel over the board in any time control. I don't think we had played a blitz game before this. So this is our first game, and it happened to be a classical game. And this was 2014, so Daniel was already grandmaster at this time. His FIDE rating, I believe, 2601, whereas I was at 2307. So roughly FIDE master, kind of hoping to fight for some international master norms. And if I got the tournament right, I think I actually ended up getting an IM norm in this tournament, possibly even one of my first. So I was very, very excited to play Daniel because, of course, I'd heard his name for many years. He's kind of this like super prodigy growing up, eventual legend of the game. Yeah, I'd never played him before, but as usual, I was always very excited when I got a chance to play someone that I considered to be an incredibly strong player. So I definitely was trying my best in this game and hoping to put up a good fight. He went e4, I went e5, which was my repertoire at the time. Knight f3, knight c6, and bishop to b5. So Ruy Lopez, which I think was Daniel's main choice when it came to e4, e5 positions. I played a6, the classical stuff, knight f6, castles, and now b5 and bishop to c5. So this is the so-called Archangel defense, or Arkhangelsk as well, it's called. And it's one of the solid choices that black can play. And again, this was my repertoire at the time. So here white plays c3. There's different directions that white can take the game. They can play with like d3, knight c3, rook e1, try to play knight d5, h3 as well. Or white can play with c3 and d4, which I believe is a bit more ambitious, looking to capture big center. So d6, d4, bishop to b6, and now bishop to e3. So white can't really get much here with d takes e5. Black kind of has everything defended, and at some point the e-pawn might hang. So white just develops here with bishop to e3. Important details that if knight takes e4, white has bishop to d5, winning a piece. So black, of course, can't snag that pawn. And instead I castled. So knight d2, defending the pawn on e4, bishop to b7. And now Daniel pushes d5, which is not a necessary move, but it's one of the typical moves that white can choose in this position. After black plays bishop to b7, a lot of times black wants to go e takes d4, c takes d4, and knight a5 or knight b4, opening up the bishop on the diagonal and hitting the e-pawn, especially with an eventual rook to e8. So on bishop to b7, it makes sense for white to play d5, as this shuts down the diagonal. Now the bishop starts biting on granite, and black will eventually actually have to spend a move to bring the bishop back to c8. So knight e7, bishop takes b6. Very important that if bishop takes e3, white would of course play d takes c6, winning a piece. So knight e7, white takes on b6, c takes b6, and now black's pawns on the queen side are doubled, and I would say in general this structure feels like white is a bit better. The computer says that it's roughly equal, but yeah, to me it feels like white has kind of the more pleasant game. So here comes an interesting move from Daniel, knight e1, with the plan to bring the knight to d3 and possibly even push for f4 in the future. There's different ways of playing the position. I think the most common move is rook to e1. a4 is also an idea. But the way Daniel handled it actually I thought was quite interesting. So knight e1, I go knight to g6. This is a pretty typical move. Black is just trying to transfer the knight to the king side. At some point bishop c8 comes into play as well. It seems like maybe knight to d7 was better, where on knight to d3, black can also can consider f5, but also think about knight to c5, and seems to be doing okay. But instead I play knight g6, which is a normal move, knight d3, bishop c8, and now a4. So white starts putting some pressure on the queen side. Definitely this makes sense once black has played bishop c8. Now the rook on a8 is undefended. So I took on a4, bishop takes a4, and I decided to play a5. And my reasoning for this move, I think, was mainly to cover the b4 square for the knight. I probably thought I couldn't play b5 because of bishop takes b5 using the pin on the a file. But there are some tactics here with bishop to g4, where black hits the queen and defends the rook with tempo. So now both pieces are under attack. White would have to play f3 here to hit the bishop on g4. But then, for example, I could play bishop takes f3 or queen b6 check, and I'd be able to get my pawn back and take the bishop on b5. So for example, bishop takes f3 followed by queen to b6 and a b5, and black would be, I think, at least equal there because white kind of lost an important pawn on the king side. So I didn't realize that this was possible, but probably on b5, Daniel wouldn't take on b5. He'd probably realize bishop g4 is annoying and instead maybe drop back bishop to c2, and okay, game would continue. That's roughly equal. But maybe simpler would be bishop to g4 here for black, f3, bishop to d7, and it seems like things here are about equal as well. But I played a5, which is dubious because now it allows white to kind of plant the bishop in with bishop to c6, which I remember just not thinking was a big deal in the game. I just kind of thought the bishop is a bit stuck on c6. You know, now it's like away from the king side. And so if I can create counterplay on the king side as black, then the bishop is kind of far away. But of course, on the other hand, the bishop is dominating the queen side and covering a lot of very important squares in black's position. So rook a7, and now comes b4, using the pin on the a file and looking to cement the bishop with b5. So here I go bishop d7, c4, queen c7, and now b5. And so I was basically like asking white to go c4 and b5. Like by putting pressure on this bishop, I essentially allowed him to kind of fix the bishop on the c6 square, because I kind of felt like, you know, again, the bishop is annoying and dominant, but it's also like stuck in this quadrant on the board. Right now it can't really get out. And so my concept was that if I can, again, kind of put play on the king side, then the bishop would be out of play. But of course, this was the wrong evaluation. And Daniel comes up with a really, really interesting idea to kind of refute my concept. So here I played bishop c8. And so now I'm like avoiding the trade. So I'm like, all right, your bishop here is on c6. It looks nice, but everything is kind of closed. And so what are you going to do? I have a protected pass pawn on a5, and maybe I can try and orchestrate some kind of f5 break. But here comes c5. And I remember being like completely shocked by this move. Like I totally wasn't expecting it. Because I don't even know if I like considered the move. I might have considered the move and thought it has no future because dc5, if knight c4, then I'm taking on e4 and covering the d6 square. So I thought this would just be pawn up for black. I go knight d6 with a nice blockade, and I'm totally fine. So that might have been what I was thinking. Of course, this game was 11 years ago, so I don't remember most of my thoughts. But yeah, Daniel plays c5 anyway. And I know in his Mastering Positional Chess book, he has a whole chapter on positional sacrifices. And so I remember thinking like, uh-oh, I'm about to get whacked. Because now it's a problem because white is breaking through. So very, very powerful idea, essentially to just open up the c4 square for the knight, where the knight stands really, really strong. And this is like a classic positional sacrifice where white gives up a pawn, not for any kind of immediate like tactical win, but rather to improve the positional power of the pieces and to improve the potential of the pieces. So really, really nice idea. If b takes c5, white could follow up a couple of ways. One way would be to just defend the pawn and bring this knight to c4. Another way would be to play knight to b2 and bring this knight to c4, where of course eventually white is trying to push b6 and just win the game with a very, very strong b pawn. And now obviously the bishop on c6 is just a monster piece because it's outposted in black's camp. So I took dc, which I had to do. And now again, knight c4 is now working because of knight takes e4, but Daniel just goes calm move rook to e1. And so this was what I just completely underestimated in the game, that he can just sack the pawn with c5, I take, and then go rook e1. And yeah, black isn't stopping white from playing knight c4 here with just a very nice grip. So game remains interesting. I go knight e8, queen to b3. Maybe it was even stronger for white to play f4. I think the engine was suggesting this one, with the idea that if black takes on f4, let's say knight takes f4, then white would trade ef4 and push e5, where now white has given up two pawns, but of course the pawns in the center are absolutely dominant. Black's pieces are horrible, and this last move e5 kills the knight on e8. So another kind of positional sacrifice, but one that's probably a little bit more clear this time. Of course, white is probably going to pick up this pawn eventually, and then, yeah, d6 is coming, knight to c4, and all of white's pieces just immediately crush. So that would have been a very nice idea. Instead, Daniel plays it a bit more calmly, queen to b3. And this move is also kind of preventing me from playing f5, because then there's d6 ideas. So I go queen to d8, getting out of the way. Knight to c4. Now knight to d6. And here white takes the pawn on e5 and gets his pawn back. And there wasn't really a way for black to keep the pawn. For example, if f6, then I think d6 actually was very, very scary for me, and I didn't want to allow this. But white doesn't have to rush. He can also go rook a d1, and he just has this tremendous long-term compensation. For instance, I can get knight d6 in, but then knight db2, and now white will trade off the blockading knight on d6, bring the other knight to c4, d-pawn starts hammering through, and it's just a beautiful position for all of white's pieces. So I decided to play knight d6 and just give the e-pawn right away, which I think was a correct decision. White takes on e5. And in fact, according to the computer, it might have been better not to take this pawn. Maybe white should have actually just kept the pressure with a move like knight b2, going for this idea to take on d6 and bring the second knight to c4. But instead, Daniel took on e5, which I can't blame him, winning back the pawn. And now, of course, if white moves the knight away, gets e5, it's going to be crushing. But the problem is black takes on e5, knight e5, and gets rook e7 in. And now the knight on e5 is hit, pawn on e4 is under attack as well. So white goes f4 to defend the knight. But now comes very important move f5. And here I was actually kind of thinking I'm like maybe back in the game after f5, because I feel like, oh, I'm breaking up white's center. And now I'm kind of taking the fight to the king side. So if I'm able to bring things over to the king side, bishop on c6, again, is going to feel out of the game. So here white takes on f5, rook takes f5, and now Daniel played g3. And yeah, at this point I actually couldn't really figure out what to do here for black. I ended up playing king h8, which I think I just used as kind of like a useful move, getting the king off the diagonal away from any potential checks. It turns out this was my one chance to actually get back into the game. So black had a very strong move here, g5, which I can't say I considered. I really don't think I looked at this at all. Once you see it on the board, it actually makes a ton of sense. Black kind of breaks on the king side, hits the pawn on f4, undermines the knight on e5. And actually this is following kind of black's strategic plan of trying to open the king side, where potentially we can use our light squared bishop and white can't. So I really wish I had played this move, or at least considered it, but honestly I don't think I looked at it at all. But amazingly, it actually gives black very, very good chances. So had I found this, it would have been a much better fight. Interestingly, h6 is perhaps the second best move, with the idea to break with g5. But I played king h8, which actually ends up making my king worse. And it gives white a very, very crucial tempo to build up his position. Because now Daniel plays rook to e2. And at this point, it's too late to play g5, because now rook ae1 is coming with the threat of knight g6 check, and rook takes e7. And so now black has to deal with the threats on the e-file. There's also ideas of rook e8 check in the future, supported by the bishop and winning the queen. So at this point, black actually starts facing huge difficulties. I played rook f8, which I think is the best move given the situation, trying to cover the back rank, getting the rook off of the f5 square, which maybe some of my other pieces can use. Rook ae1, now threatening knight g6 check. And here I play knight f5, defending the rook on e7. So this ends up being a pretty bad move. I think black's best move was to play rook a7, which, yeah, I don't think I considered it much, because it's just like a strange move, just pulling the rook away from the e-file, giving up the fight for the e-file completely. But yeah, I think there was just no way to successfully keep the rook on e7, so that's why this move was needed. And the rook can at least help push the a-pawn, which might distract white from building up on the king side. Because now white is actually doing really well in the center. Knight on e5 is strong, rooks on the e-file are very perfectly placed. So I didn't find that one. I played knight to f5, but now Daniel hits me with a very strong move. I thought I'm kind of threatening knight d4 here with the fork, but he just goes g4. He's like, go ahead and play knight d4. And only here it dawned on me that if I play knight d4, white has a very nice refutation here. And he, of course, had to see it, otherwise knight d4 would be a big problem for white, but he can do knight g6 check. Now, if the king moves, we're taking the rook with check, so white would be winning huge material here. But the big point is that if hg, then white has queen h3 check, sliding over with the queen with tempo, and after king g8, rook takes e7, white wins the exchange, and of course has a super active position, and is winning this one. Rook e8 here is a potential threat, so there's no rook takes f4, because rook e8 would just win black's queen. So very nice shot g4, and I remember this move being just like completely unexpected to me, because it seems like white is opening up the king side, but there's just no way for black to actually take advantage of it, because white's pieces are now really, really well placed. He has d6 ideas to open up the rest of his stuff, and yeah, it's a huge problem for black, and knight g6 check is still hanging in the air. So I played knight h4. I didn't see another move. It covers knight g6 because I can take with the knight and defend the rook. But the knight on h4 is very loose, and white immediately goes after it with queen to g3. Another just like very perfect, like harmonious move, bringing every piece to where it needs to go. The queen defends the pawn, hits the knight on h4, and now black just doesn't have a good move. Even if the knight did have a safe square, then knight g6 check would be winning the exchange. So at this point, it's basically over. I could move the rook to defend the knight with the queen, but then, for example, now white can push d6. Can't take because knight on h4 is hanging. d7 is a big problem. The rooks can come to the d file, and yeah, black is just cooked. So here I tried g5, and this is far too late at this point, and basically just desperation. Daniel takes on g5. There's no reason not to. My follow-up was to go rook takes e5, queen takes e5 comes with check. I go king to g8. And yeah, zero part of me thought, he's going to blunder knight f3, but at least, I knew I was busted, but okay, I have a threat. G4 is hanging, I'm just doing my best to kind of keep the game going. But white just deals with this in a very simple way. Daniel found d6, and definitely I think the strongest move. Covering the f3 square, so now if knight f3 check, white can just take it, but also threatening bishop d5 check, which just ends the game because black has to give up a ton of material to deal with this. And if I do go knight f3, well, white can take, rook takes. I think there are many ways here. Looks like queen d5 check is good. I think queen e8 is extremely simple as well. Just trading queens and eventually winning the endgame up the exchange. So after d6, I just resign here because I realized it's completely over. Knight f3 is hopeless. Otherwise, bishop d5 is coming, and yeah, it's game. So very nice game by Daniel. I remember thinking that his concept with c4 c5 was just fantastic. Maybe for a player of his level, it's just like simple, this kind of breakthrough. But for me, Fish 2300 FIDE Master at the time, I was definitely impressed by just like how strong this idea ended up being. And I remember back then, like the engines weren't that impressed with white's play. They didn't think like, oh, c5 is so incredible. But today's engines do give white a huge advantage. So yeah, they've started to appreciate this idea. But I'm glad at least it was kind of an interesting game. And it turns out black did have some chances here, especially once I got f5 on the board. And I had this one opportunity at this moment to find g5 with counterplay. I missed it. Sometimes you get a chance against a strong player, but if you miss it, they usually don't give you another one. And after I played king h8 from here, actually, it was pretty much just one-way traffic because I wasn't able to deal with the eventual build-up on the king side. And, of course, the break with g4 and queen g3 and everything flowing in. Yeah, once again, Daniel just kind of made it look effortless, and yeah, that was the game. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed those two games from Daniel. He, of course, had a number of fantastic wins in his career. And yeah, I would encourage you to keep watching his stuff and looking up his games and learning as much as you can from him. I'll probably be maybe writing something with some more of my thoughts on Danya, and yeah, I hope to at some point get back to doing content on this channel. I might take a little bit of a break from this, but yeah, I'm still a chess player. I still have a lot of chess I want to play myself and go to tournaments and keep training and studying and working on it. One of the things I always really appreciated about Danya was just how much he loved chess and just how obvious it was how much he loved the game. I think that's part of the reason why he was just so well read. Like, he read every chess book and knew every player, like knew all these games. You know, he's just a student of the game, I think, because he loved it so much. And yeah, I think a lot of us aren't ready to quit chess just yet. So I think the grind will continue. Alrighty, thanks for watching.